And we never even meant to be pop stars. Like, we ended up becoming pop stars. That was never a plan. I ended up turning to drug abuse a lot of the time because I was so fucking anxious going to these events. I won 500 quid from one of these competitions, and that is literally how I began Rizzle Kicks. Imagine being a young man and suddenly you're given money and notoriety. I suddenly was appealing, for example, to women in a way that I hadn't felt before. Like, to be appealing to people based off of whether it was power or not, or fame or not, was definitely a rush. We became victims of our own success in a way. The pressure was pretty high. I was like, fuck, I think I need to go speak to someone.
Thank you so much for joining me.
No worries.
Very excited to have you here and talk about kind of your career, where you've come from and where you are now. I really appreciate how open you've been about a lot of it, and I feel like that's very important when people are looking at either getting into an industry or just looking at like the reality behind people's success. I feel like there's not a lot of that online. So kind of going way back to the beginning, you started Rizzle Kicks with a friend from school, is that right?
Carly, yeah. We went to college together, but we knew each other a bit before that.
And what was like the catalyst for starting the band?
It kind of came together because I was rapping already. I was making tracks since I was like 13, not taking it very seriously. And then I heard a couple of songs, one by The Streets. I think it's Let's Push Things Forward off their first album, Original Part Material, which is a classic. And then another song by, I think they were called like the Flowbots or something random, like this band called Handlebars, this tune. And either way, it was basically a rapper or, you know, like a poet, I suppose. And then a singer was singing the end of the person's lines. And I thought, oh, I really want that. I'd love that in my rap song. So I asked Harley if he would be up for that in the studio, and he did it. And then we decided to do a song where he did like 8 bars and I did 8 bars. And then that song, loads of our mates were like, oh, that's really good. And I was like, well, thanks. I've been fucking doing my own shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, we realised that actually having the two of us doing it was quite unique in terms of us, you know, having like an equal footing and being a rapper and a singer. So we gave it a go, didn't go to uni. In that gap year, we tried our best to start a career, and it worked.
Yeah, it really took off. And was it always your dream to be a musician, or was it, what was kind of your original dream?
I wanted to be a footballer until I was maybe 14, 15. I wasn't bad. I had trials for Charlton when I was a kid, and when Charlton Athletic were good, sorry. And then Brighton.
Calling people out already in the first 30 seconds.
No, listen, I loved Charlton in their prime. Jason Ewell, they're fucking great, but they went downhill. But Brighton and Hove Albion, I went on trial for when I was about 14, I think. And like for a technicality, I never played any trial games, all this kind of stuff. So I was kind of on the press, I was on like the edge of it, but still, even at that point, even if I got signed to an academy, the chances that you actually make it pro are so slim. That story is actually fascinating. I wonder if you should get some footballers on this podcast, because I really think it's such a high pressure, wild environment.
I think about it a lot because there's so many, when you talk to people, there's so many people who were at academies and so many people who really thought that their career would be in either
Sports.
Going into the Prem or like whatever. And I really want to look at the effect of on people's mental health.
You should
these
speak to young boys. Yeah, it's crushing.
And who had essentially like kind of teed up to, this is going to be, you know, everyone looks at it all over the world, doing football in the UK and playing in the Prem and making all this money and all of this, and it's kind of like teed up. And of course the academies want to keep people in them in case they might be the best. And actually it really must like.
Well, there's a cutting point. There's a cutting point when you're about 17 or 18. And at that point, if you don't make it and you have no backup, like, and that's been your entire life since you're a little boy, it's a lot to take that, you know. It's a lot of pressure. I think it's something like 9% of all boys make it. But anyway, I was on the edge of it, and I actually got distracted by just like smoking weed. And I suppose girls at that point, my hormones had kicked in, and the culture I was in at that time, it was like, I was being asked by this coach to, you know, run a mile every morning and change my diet and all this kind of shit. And I was like, no, I'd rather just get high and write raps. And fortunately,
That paid off.
Yeah. I'm not a stoner, by the way. I can't be a stoner. I'm too much of a lightweight, but I did used to at least indulge.
Yeah, and so when did that start changing from originally, obviously, football was your dream, and then you kind of turned towards other things, but was there a single point that you kind of thought, actually, do you know what? Like, music could be it?
I remember when I was younger, I just made music anyway. So my mum and dad, as I was growing up, they're both musicians. They were both musicians. My mum's a very talented songwriter. My dad's a great songwriter and an accomplished musician.
Yeah,
you know,
amazing.
He's actually fuming that he never taught me how to play guitar. But I remember as a kid in our like kind of council flat, my mum would have her lyrics all over the floor, and I remember kind of crawling around them, and I still remember kind of all of my mum's lyrics from when I was a kid. This is one of them actually on my arm.
Oh, amazing.
And so I naturally just started making music to deal with emotions genuinely. Yeah. So like the first track, or maybe the second track I ever made was a diss on my school form tutor. Like, for real, like when I was in year 8, so that would have been 12. And then I was using it to kind of vent all this anger. And then as I got older, because I'd grown up in Neasden in London, in Brent, it was quite rough in Brent when I was there. And then when I went to Brighton when I was about 10, I thought it was like a wonderland because I was by the sea and everything was a lot more chill. It wasn't as much pressure. There's a certain point, I think, when you're in certain areas in London, you know, there's a certain point when you come of age almost, and then you're confronted with other challenges.
For sure.
And so in Brighton, they weren't really there. I mean, there were some rough parts in Brighton, but I thought it was great. So when I started getting older, my raps were more like upbeat. Like I was like just buzzing to just be alive. And the kids, like grime had just kicked off around that time. I mean, I don't know if it was the second time it kicked off or the first, but so a lot of the rappers in Brighton were like kind of emulating that London sound. And they used to take the piss out of me for being like a happy rapper. So I was like, well, fuck it. At that point, I was the only child. And I just like was so used to my own company and just being in my bedroom and just teaching myself how to make websites and shit. I didn't really care if people embarrassed me or mocked me. And I really did get mocked. I used to get like some of the other rappers like almost like run like MySpace campaigns to like take the piss out of me. Serious. It was crazy. And but I just stuck with it. And I think because I looked at all these music competitions, I used to love entering competitions as a kid. I just thought competitions were the best place to exist because you never really knew, like you either win or it doesn't matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you might as well give it a go.
Yeah, you don't get like hated on for not winning. So I used to enter every competition, seriously, like this is even before music. I just enter. If it was a competition, I just enter it. Like if someone said, draw this, I just draw it.
And what was do you know what like the end aim was for that? Like was there a specific motivation?
With music, I just used to Google like UK music competition and just enter all of them.
So
I ended every single one.
I love the self-motivation. Like that's not something you hear about actually a lot as like
it was just pure competitions. Like... pure competition. And I would just be like, and then I would think, well, and then what it turned out that being like a 15-year-old rapper like was really like quite unique to be entering a competition. So I'd end up in these like adult music competitions or like at least university level competitions, and I'd win little awards like most original act, or I won 500 quid from one of these competitions, and that is literally how I began Rizzle Kicks, was with that 500 quid.
No way.
Because I bought like an iPod to start off with, and then I actually bought the original beat to Down with the Trumpets from a dude in Whitechapel.
No way.
Yeah. So it was like, and I just got that from a bursary from a competition that I entered. I didn't even win the competition. They just gave me 500 quid for like trying hard.
That's unbelievable, and I also think it just shows like how much even like small investment in the arts, just in terms of like getting kids just like doing more and more in terms of like music and arts and all of these things that aren't necessarily as encouraged in school. Like even just that one thing to have been the catalyst for essentially what ended up, you know, being a success. Your career.
What, just that little bit of money? Yeah, no, of course. Listen, it's one of the tragedies of our current government is that they don't put more money into arts. And I'm a patron of a charity called Audio Active, which was the first kind of youth club I'd go to. And I got taught, you know, all these rap techniques by these incredible mentors. And they put on things at the moment, one's called Room to Rant, where these young boys will come and utilize rap as a form of like self-expression, you know, to mediate their mental health. You know, it's just like it's a wonderful space to exist in. Creativity is an essential part of being a human being, and it's a travesty that anyone would consider cutting that funding.
It's so insane. I mean, I did a lot on it when that was kind of a specific area that I studied, but I also feel like just in general, when you think about it, of course, fine, it might not make money for the wider society, but like the actually valuing the output of like artists, musicians, all of that, just based on the monetary value is insane. Because
but even if you looked at it from a monetary value, I think artists.
Of course, there's a business case for it, but like that's when, you know, when governments aren't investing in it, it's because they think they're not necessarily going to get the payback from it.
That doesn't make any sense, because if you take, like, me and Harley went to the Brit School, right? I think the Brit School at the moment is struggling for funding, which is, again, like Adele went to Brit School, there's a whole list. So Loyal Kana went to Brit School. We went to Brit School. I think Kate Nash. There's like a list. My friend Rachel Chinariri, she made a whole list of like the alumni. King Krul. There's some incredible artists who went to that school. I didn't even study music. I did media. I wanted to be a writer director. But yeah, the funding's not there. Apparently, that's what I'm hearing. You know that, and it's like that is an institution. Adele just like is one of the flags of the UK and will be for a very long time. Yeah, and to cut the funding from the school, and the vibe in the school is wicked, because everyone's just doing their thing. There's no like other shit going on, because you've got one subject split into 18 units and you're focused on that one subject. Yeah. Everyone hangs out in their strands. There's no bullshit. There's like any bullshit and you're just out of the school. It's that simple. There's no zero tolerance. So everyone just does their own thing. Yeah, and so you'd got together and you'd created this band, and it was Down with the Trumpets the first song that you created. And how did that kind of immediately take off? No. That's what's so funny about music. I mean, this is actually a good point of reference for people who are trying now. Obviously, it was different back then because we didn't have the onslaught of social media that we have now, this like ridiculous amount of pressure on an artist to self-market. But we did have MySpace. That was the equivalent. Yeah. And Down with the Trumpets, you know, I re-recorded it with Harley. I made it myself first. Re-recorded it with Harley. And it was on our MySpace for like 9 months. Like, not like... nothing. Yeah. And then I bumped into this guy. I mean, I know when you asked me to give bullet points on my career, I'm not sure if I said this in other podcasts, but the single most important part, I think the most like serendipitous part of my career was that I decided to go to my friend's family drinks one night, which is honestly is quite an unappealing invite. Yeah. You know what I mean? It was like, but I just happened to be walking past the end of his road when he invited me. Shout out Ben and Smallwoods. And I went there and it was lovely, nice time. I loved that family. And there happened to be this guy there called Toby Lockerbie, who was a wedding photographer. And I got chatting to him and he said, do you want to see this video of my family's trip to Bath? And I was like... Not really. Yeah. And then he showed me this video and it was unreal. And I was like, dude, how did you do that? And he was like, I just got this function on my Canon 5D. I said, do you want to shoot a music video? And he was like, yeah, why not? It'd be fun. Shot a video Down with the Trumpets, put it up online, and got signed like 3 months later. Unbelievable. And did you put it up on YouTube? Was it just kind of self-uploaded? We'd put the work in and that, you know, me and Hars were working hard, man. We put up our own website. We used to like upload blog posts all the time. I'd released a mixtape on my own. Yeah. That was like knocking about on WordPress. Some people still tell me about that mixtape, which is crazy. So there was a small buzz in place. And they probably felt bigger at the time. It's when you're kind of looking back and it's you kind of see that steep incline when it all obviously took off. But before that point, you would have been working like on it kind of every day. I used to nick views off it. So basically on my mixtape, I would rap over already like successful songs, but I used to pick songs specifically that no one else had rapped over. So I rapped over like Ain't No Other Man by Christina Aguilera or Old Yellow Bricks by Arctic Monkeys. I think someone else did rap over that actually, but just like I just tried to find these songs that would be it would be wild that someone would rap over it. Made this mixtape, and obviously I'd catch a buzz if that song's popping off. Yeah. So when Trumpets went up as an original, you know, Rizzle Kick song, I think there was that like thing of, oh shit, you know, and we were looking all flash in the video because the video had this shallow depth of field, which now is like common. And that it's so mad to think in like 10 years this has happened. But now, what made our video so incredible, it automatically does on an iPhone. Like,
really?
Yeah, it's like that. The level of videography is on another fucking planet now. But back then, just purely by the fact that Toby could focus on someone in the foreground and blow, we were mind blown. looked like we'd spent like 30 grand. We'd done it for nothing.
Yeah.
But now you can't even get away with that because you can just do that on your iPhone.
Yeah, that's insane. And so did it start to take off first on YouTube, or was it kind of?
So it went first on YouTube. We got 100,000 views. Me and Harley could not fucking believe it. A record label came. We got offered a few different labels. We went with a guy called Nick, who's a legend. And one of the first things they said is, right, we're going to make a new video. And me and Harley were like,
no, the video's a thing.
We were like, are you fucking kidding? And they were like, trust me. And then we managed to implement our old video into the new video because we were so attached to it. And we couldn't believe we'd let go of 100,000 views. But, now it's on, I don't know, like 35 million or something crazy like that.
Insane.
But we put the song out and it entered into the charts at like 144. But then there's another beautiful moment where Fern Cotton heard our music. And, again, we'd grafted hard enough to have everything in place for that to happen. We didn't know she was going to hear our music. That was actually a wonderful accident through my godfather. It was wild how that even happened. But she was like, who are these guys? But we had done BBC introducing, we'd done the groundwork. So we were like, here's the song.
But I think that's always the case, is like we see a lot of like overnight success, quote unquote. And for an overnight success to actually have any longevity at all, it's always the fact that actually there was so much graft before that point, and fine, it didn't get as much traction as that thing after that like really took it off. Yeah. But actually, if you hadn't have done all of those other bits for people to latch onto as well.
I think that. And it is weird because we were an overnight success. And I think it's actually worked against us a little bit because, people like to see journeys. And our journey was fucking wild. Like we were playing to like 40 people in Brighton, mostly our mates. And then one song picks up on radio. It was in 1 month. Our life changed.
And how was your experience with your first kind of record deal?
Like at the time, me and Holly were just gassed to have money. That was it. Wasn't that much money in hindsight. Maybe at the time it felt like, for us, it felt like fucking loads of money.
Yeah.
But we were just over the moon. We just went out that night and just bought everyone's drinks.
Yeah.
Right.
And so you'd kind of been at this point catapulted into fame.
The record deal came and the fame came like about 9 months after.
Right. And that was was it through that specific song? Was it through?
We went into the studio and made a bunch of shit, and we couldn't even believe the label wanted to release Down with the Trumpets. We were like, "You're insane! You should hear this other shit we've been doing." Like, because to us that was old news. And then Trumpets came out, and it was number 8, and it stayed in the charts for a long time, 2-3 months even. It was never went into top 5, but like over time the numbers were crazy. And and then that was it. And then back then music videos used to be on telly all the time, and everything's changed now.
Yeah, it's unbelievable how much the music industry in particular has changed. And what was kind of next on that journey in terms of like solidifying yourself as artists and kind of really growing in the scene?
I think because of the success of Down with the Trumpets, we were quite quickly under, I wouldn't say pressure, but there was like a plan in place. At that time, major labels had more of an idea of how to make something work. We'd done this song with Fatboy Slim, Mama Do the Hump. We knew it was a banger, so we didn't want to like release it straight away. Yeah. So we put out another song called When I Was a Youngster, and then we waited for Mama, and Mama, blew up, and we dropped our album, and that went really well. So it was just like we were just capitalizing on it, and we felt like we were everywhere for a minute. I don't know if I could even use the term like solidify. It's a wild one, because when I look back on it now, having seen people come and go, and my interests have expanded, and I've gone into other industries and still love music. And me and Hals, we have plans, but we were just riding the wave, man. And we never even meant to be pop stars. Like we ended up becoming pop stars. That was never a plan. Yeah. And the music I listened to, the music I grew up with wasn't necessarily pop music. I love some pop music. Yeah. But it became a bit of a different profession to what we'd expected. We love writing and creating music. Being a pop star is, I think, slightly different. It's a different thing, and we didn't like that so much.
And in that way, did you enjoy the kind of fame side of it?
I think getting famous in your early 20s has perks. There's like immediate highs, especially as a young man, because you suddenly have this power. And I, for one, felt like a weirdo when I was a teenager. And so I suddenly was appealing, for example, to women in a way that I hadn't felt before. And again, looking back on it, I would probably take my younger self to the side and install a little more self-worth, you know. But I suddenly, like, to be appealing to people based off of whether it was power or not, or fame or not, was definitely a rush. And then obviously we had a bunch of guys around us who wanted to have a good time too, and would come on tour with us. And it was everything, you know. Imagine being a young person, young man, and suddenly you're given money and notoriety. And yeah, you know, we get free shit. I end up hanging out with footballers, which blew my fucking mind, because I'd be playing like FIFA, you know, on a computer with these players, and then I'd just see them in real life at like an event. Ended up becoming friends with a few footballers or other artists, other musicians, actors. You know, I remember the first time I met Stephen Graham, he knew who I was. I could not believe it. Like, that's one of my favorite actors ever, still is. So all of those things are amazing. But it was stressful. Again, the way it's hard to differentiate between, you know, perks, the highs, and what was a coping mechanism, because I also got really bad paranoia. I ended up turning to drug abuse a lot of the time because I was so fucking anxious going to these events, you know what I mean? And I just didn't know what was going on. I didn't know how much money I had. I didn't know, you know, Harley might have known a bit more. He's a bit more on it than me, but it was a wave, you know, and like, it's hard because you don't know you don't know yourself at that point. I shouldn't say you. I always do that. It's a deflective thing. I didn't know myself at that point. Yeah. So that's the downside to gaining that attention at a young age.
Yeah, I also think that, because we see a lot of it now, like we see a lot of people, especially with social media, a lot of like catapulting straight into fame.
Right.
And I also think that with any of that like sudden attention / external validation / like opinions from elsewhere, it's such a change in the way you live, and like such a change in the amount of information you receive from other people, whether it's like good or bad, that I don't think anyone can get used to it that quickly. So if it happens like really fast and to a really like high extent, and then kind of like keeps going like that, I can imagine it just being so difficult to actually like deal with all of the changes, and also even know who you are, because the amount of people around you as well, like, you don't know who's there for what, you don't know.
I hear that a lot, yeah. And I felt like we kept a reasonably tight circle in terms of that shit. Maybe if, you know, you deep it in terms of like, the attention from women or like, I suppose kind of like temporary friends. Yeah, I can see that. But we were just like some scrappy kids basically that had ended up in this space. And I think that attention is a lot to take, but it's interesting. But so do you feel like you have had a shift in attention? Because you've got quite a following online now, right?
So for me, it grew over a few years when it was definitely too young. Like I've talked about before, how for me, my change in, I guess, like attention on like online validation, all of these things, even if you don't notice them, and even if you don't think about it in terms of like, oh, these people like me, it's like, it was at a stage where, you know, where you're like a kind of older end of a teenager and you're starting to really start to know yourself, and you move probably from slight like self-conscious, lots of insecurities, into being a bit more confident in yourself. And I think that when my following started growing, it was exactly at that point. So I think I then, about like 3 years later, had a huge self-confidence crisis and kind of like, who am I crisis? Because within that time, I think what I thought had been replaced by like teenage self-consciousness had been replaced by like confidence and knowing who I was, I think had actually been replaced by external validation and like people online.
So you didn't know who you were?
No, I don't think I did. And I think I thought I did because I was like happy with myself, because other people would be happy with me and like outwardly saying that. And then
your audience was built from you just documenting the growth of your businesses. Media.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Completely
so
wild.
We're in an office now of a company that you run.
Yeah.
And you're still super young, right?
25, yeah.
Yeah. That's wild. You've got 2 businesses.
Yeah. So it's insane, but it was also like there was a point there where I just stepped away completely from social media, because I was like, I don't know myself.
What was it that you think built your audience?
It was a mixture of things. So at the beginning of my at the beginning of kind of like when I started social media, I literally started it because I was trying to get into, not even get into fitness. I was like a teenager trying to like stick to going to the gym, right? And
so you're documenting it to make sure you stay doing it.
Yeah. So it wasn't even from
That's
a point of like
interesting.
expertise. It was literally like, fucked it again.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
go
yeah.
today, you know, all of this. And so we document that. And I think the reason
That's
why it grew
fascinating.
quite quickly at that stage was actually because I think the majority of like influencers / people you could see with followings online, like there weren't really that many people who'd grown from social media. It was more like influencers were actresses, musicians, like athletes, like all of these things. It was from another platform that they'd become influencers or like famous or something. So there was a lot of like very polishedness online.
Oh, so you think your rawness was appealing?
Well, I just, it wasn't even intended to be what it was. And then obviously at one point I like flipped it and was like, right, this could be something I'm going to.
But why do you think you're business minded? How do you have the thought process to be like, right, I'm building up a following because I go gym. I'm going to create a gym based brand. Like how?
So at the beginning it was out of necessity. So the first main there was a year before I started kind of my first PDF business, which was selling workout plans. Before that, I had
What's PDF mean?
Just like an online.
Oh, literally selling PDFs.
Literally like a PDF. Yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah, so that's how I originally started making money.
That's a hustle.
I know, but before that point, I'd basically been putting that stuff online for free, and then I was working as an intern in the city at the time, and I was spending so much time at the weekend shooting all of that content and putting all of it out because
You got charged for it?
Yeah, well, because I was it was like my social media was growing and everything, that I just got to a point where I was like, I'm going to have to charge for this. Like, I can't be doing this much every weekend. And so just put it into a PDF. And then the year after, when I started the thing that really took off, which is my other, not this business that we're in the office of now, but my other business, Shreddy, that was, I was at uni and I got an email from the uni bursar basically saying that my student finance hadn't come through.
Right.
And if it didn't get paid within the next, they put a date that I'd be expelled from the university.
Right.
But it was obviously just student finance, it was a fuck up on student finance's
Right.
side. So it was meant to go straight from student finance to the university and it didn't. And because I'd made, I can't remember how much it was. It was probably between a few £100 and £1,000 on the PDFs before. I was like, well, workout plans sell for a lot more. Literally wrote out my full workout plan, got my friend who was a graphic designer student, to mock it up onto something to make it look pretty. And then sold it for £35 and 1,000 sold in the first few days.
No way.
Yeah. And that's what then catapulted everything. And then I put the money from that into this business. And
how many followers did you have at that point?
I'd say around 100,000.
Just from you going gym?
Mm-hmm.
That's quite funny.
I know. I know. And also it's not
so
my
have you looked at your share of men and women?
Yeah, it's very high women. It's 75% women.
I'm fascinated by the idea of almost a female gaze in that space. It's they're watching you to motivate themselves too.
Yeah.
And then they're totally open to
which is why I loved it as well, because it never felt
pervy.
Yeah. I always had a really high women audience, and that was my notor of success, because I understood that if I was doing certain things to grow my following faster, I knew that wouldn't actually translate in terms of how engaged that following was. That. I know.
I wonder if I go gym.
Could do it.
1,000, bro, that's crazy. But I struggled with the transition into that space. I remember actually, here's a mad one for you. 25? That's not that different to me, but I was in the meeting in a record label for Instagram. I remember we'd already popped off at this point. We were on Twitter and they were like, listen guys, you got to get this app called Instagram. And I'm like, no. And they're
what my manager said about TikTok.
Yeah. And they're like, no, you get to show your fans what you do in the day. And I was like, why would I do that? Yeah. Why would I want them to see? I wanted my privacy. So I was battling it from then, and it's just fascinating to see it now. So when the stories came and then there was this understanding that you could have engagement on stories. I mean, I clocked it a little bit last year, but it's just doesn't come naturally to me. That's not how I think.
I only think mine came naturally at the point that it started showing me that was the case. It wasn't that I had
Yeah, but
a
I'm
kind
saying,
of vision,
but you would have been at a point of like peak social media when social media was peaking.
Time and a place,
Like
100%.
that's what I'm saying. Insta wasn't when we first came about, it wasn't popping. But like you would have been 5 years after that, and you would have been like 17 years old or something.
Yeah, it was
16, 17. Crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts.
That's fascinating, man.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it really was just completely born out of necessity, and you were skint.
Yeah.
It's a real hustle.
And then it turned into like Tala has been such a passion project and has been something that I really, really believe in and really want to make happen. And
but did you have other people around you? Like, does your family have like a business background, or like how were you supported in that?
So initially, I mean, literally the PDFs and stuff, like I just wrote them out.
But no one else about you was on that business vibe. Come on.
No, as in like...
Anyone in your family like own businesses?
So my dad worked in management consultancy, so like definitely on the business side, but we didn't talk about that stuff.
Might have picked up on that though.
Yeah, maybe, but I didn't live with him from when I was like, from after like 7, 8. So it would have been an early pickup. But yeah, 100%, like there's definitely certain things in there. But I also think that from an early age, I mean, even with like, I've talked about this before, that I got obsessed with the idea of making money, because if I was getting like £25, say, from my parents for like pocket money for the month, I could babysit and make that in a night, which obviously for us now is like,
that's mad that you've had that mentality. You're thinking of that at what age?
But I got obsessed with it. Like I was like 13, 14. And from that point, honestly, almost every single night I'd either babysit or music tutor someone. But
what I'm trying to say though, what's your mum doing then?
Working.
What's she working?
Arts.
Arts?
Like design, yeah.
She's hustling. Does she speak to you about money?
Not money, but
she never speaks to you about money.
She works so hard. But I think that was the thing, is I got so obsessed with the idea that I could
help her out.
Not even I think that would be saying I'm more like selfless than I am. I got obsessed with the fact that like I could get this, that to me, that £25 a month, that was like the maximum I could get. I couldn't negotiate more, right?
Yeah.
But what I could do was go and like, I remember when I was 16, there was like this advert in this, it would have been like a school like bulletin type thing, you know, that goes to the parents, like something like that. And it was like asking for a social media manager for a language school. One of the parents like owned it. And I obviously applied being like, I've had Instagram for 3 years. These are my 3 marketing strategies I suggest.
You're a fucking hustler. That's wild.
But I genuinely,
where did you grow up?
Near like Ladbroke Grove area.
Oh really? Yeah. You're a West girl. Mad.
Yeah. But I did get upset. It was definitely like this like financial thing. And I think that obviously then at one point, because that took off so much, I mean, when I sold those PDFs, I was like, that's insane. But when you kind of got to that point that you were like really kind of going up in the music industry, you're obviously, as you say, you were like surrounded by people you never thought you'd be surrounded by. How quickly did it take you to kind of realize that you were kind of facing some of the negatives of that as well?
The point at which it became a stress was we became, I guess, victims of our own success in a way. The pressure was pretty high. We would have still been very young, 22, 23, and felt as though we were boxed into a space that was outside of our control.
Right.
I mean that with the pop star thing. And I got really into drugs at that time. And then also just shit happened in our lives. People died. Relationships were hard. Things that are supposed to mature you. But I was in a kind of suspended state of adolescence in a way, because we were 18 when we became famous.
People say that a lot, that you stay the age that you become famous, and obviously not if you put a lot of work in after that point, but you know, at that point you have a lot of people come around you and almost shelter you and like bubble wrap you from the outside world, because you're there to perform and to make money with whatever like sector it's in, whether it's football, whether it's any of these things. You're literally there to be like a fucking racehorse, like to make that money, to do those things.
Do you see the horses nearby here?
Oh yeah, in the little farm.
I fucking love horses. I love horses. I got a horse tattoo. I love
really?
It. Yeah. It's basically that. And so you know, we had to deliver the second album. We dropped the second album. It didn't do as well as the first album, but it did well. You know, like it did well. But I had made a couple of decisions, which were, I'd say, anti-pop decisions. I had chosen to put certain songs out that the label would have preferred a poppier song, or I didn't put songs on the album at all that the label thought would do well, or all this kind of shit. But I wanted to. I know what music that me and Harley wanted to make, and we tried to stick to it. But then from that point, label started like saying no to things, and also music was changing, and I don't know, man, it was a lot, and I think from about that point onwards, I remember we took a year off, me and Hans, to do our own thing. We're making our own different music because we were wanting to just express ourselves in different mediums. And then when we came back round to it, you know, we were making this third album, and streaming had just started to come into effect, and it was just like a shambles in the industry. And I think we just like, Harley was struggling with anxiety as well, which suddenly came about in this year we had off. And I was just like, I don't think it's worth it, man. I don't think we need to put ourselves through this. We're just young. I just wanted to grow up. I just wanted to make sure that we both became stable men.
Yeah. And if you saw someone kind of going into that situation now, say like just starting to take off, being signed by a label and kind of riding that wave, what kind of advice would you give to them, given kind of what you went through?
I just think, I wonder sometimes, you know, how it would have been if we weren't so rushed. Like we didn't mean to be rushed. You know what I mean? Like, to be successful really quickly is great. That's not normal. And we did so well. We recouped all of our advantage. We were objectively a success. But you know, I think we should have been in a space where we weren't put on this wheel. Yeah. I think if we'd given a bit more time, I wouldn't have had to get into conflict with the powers that be. I wouldn't have had to like stood my ground and been like, listen, I don't think either of us are in you know, I think our mental health should be priority.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, for anyone young, I just think don't rush, man. Don't like stress about it. And I think, you know, I've seen artists since then in the last 10 years, artists who at that time were just starting out when we were, you know, killing it. And there's some of them that's taken them up until last year to reach like, and I'm like, fuck yeah, man. And people get to see the journey, and it's like, I think you strengthen during that process. But nowadays it's difficult for me to give advice because it's so different. Yeah. You have so much more control. You have so much more control and so much more pressure, because the thing that's fucked about music is, and maybe most arts at the moment, is because you can market yourself constantly, you're almost burdened with the reality that whenever you're not marketing yourself, you're not working.
Right, and I know in music there's often this like cycle where you're in a promo cycle or you're out of it. Like you're either about to come out with an album or you're, you know, coming out with one a while later. Promo cycle. So whereas now it's literally like a constant promo cycle, otherwise you're out of the public interest.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Which is insane. And so you've said publicly before that you kind of got into this cycle where when you'd feel bad in that time, you'd drink, and then you'd obviously after that you'd obviously kind of inevitably feel worse in an industry that's kind of revolves a lot around like partying and going out and all of that. Like, how do you even get out of a cycle like that?
I mean, it's a mad one for me. I think my actual drug problems came more around. Wasn't even the partying that made it a problem. It was when I started doing drugs at home, because amphetamines or like uppers, I didn't realize the extent of my ADHD at that time, and I was kind of oddly self-medicating. But then I became obsessed with fitness, actually, weirdly, at about 24, and that took me off the drugs. I actually became initially my first stint of sobriety I did myself. And because I was drinking a lot. I was drinking like 35 cans a week or some shit. I don't even know what. I was balancing off the harder drugs I was doing.
Yeah.
And I'd put on weight and shit. And I remember I went on a holiday and I was just like, fuck. Relative to me. So I was like, fuck this. And then obviously I've got an addictive personality. So I literally just got addicted to the gym, ended up doing stupid hours. I mean, that's a whole other thing. That's actually left me with other problems too. But
to even get yourself out of that.
Yeah, it took me out of the cycle, because I was just like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge achievement in itself. To do a stint of sobriety, like from that point by yourself is, I mean, usually it takes a lot to, you know, get people to even seek help, to acknowledge you probably need help in some way, and to also administer that help yourself. I mean, it takes a lot of, I know you say it's because of like an addictive personality in another way, but it takes a lot of self-control and... Yeah,
well, I mean, it's just as a message to people generally, like the more love you show your body, the easier it is to hear it. It tells you what it needs.
Yeah.
And I fortunately met one of my best friends, Mackenzie, who I love. He was my personal trainer and then became one of my closest friends. And, you know, I didn't know anything when I went to him. I didn't know about nutrition. I didn't understand it. And he was showing me the way, that he was explaining to me about food, explaining to me about exercise. And I was like, all right, cool. Clicked into it. And I felt like that was a much better use of my time. And then I was conflicted about going out and the drugs. And, you know, but I was definitely doing it less. But all of this shit is kind of as a means of survival. You know, I tend to pick myself up, even if it gets a little bit close to the edge. But I do wonder if I'd thrown myself back into the kind of machine after that second album. I do wonder. I did think at the time that I'm not sure if I would have even survived that, to be honest, because there's a reason why there's so many tragic stories about young entertainers, because it's just like a fucking violent world to be in, mentally and spiritually.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can completely imagine. You see a lot of it in the press, and there's a lot of like, why does it happen? And then you look at the way the industry works, and it's kind of like,
the music industry is fucking wild. There's a guy called Graham Greene. No, that's not his name. I can't remember his name. Fuck. He's quite a contentious author. He wrote a book called The 48 Laws of Power.
Oh, yeah, Robert Greene.
Robert Greene.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's okay.
So he wrote that book because of what he'd seen in Hollywood and the kind of just like the power games that go on in Hollywood. But I saw a clip of a podcast of him the other day, and he was saying that he worked with 50 Cent or some shit. Like after he made a new book called The 50th Law or something. And he says the music industry is the worst industry he's ever seen. He says it's undeniably more exploitative, and it's insane how it works and what artists are expected to do and what they get back.
Well, I guess like the whole industry works on the fact that there are these people in the industry all the time, aka the producers, the publishers, the promoters, like all of these. And then there are people who come through that industry that are the people who have to actually make the industry work, like the talent themselves. So the musicians, the songwriters, all of that. And so all of these people around them actually have to get the most out of these people because it doesn't work without them. And so it's almost like they go into it as it's like a processing machine. Like it's
but
like
they exploit them.
No, exactly.
What's mad is it's
being treated as machines.
Yeah. Azealia Banks made a good point on Instagram recently where she was talking about like the fact that, you know, an employee, a reasonably high up employee at you know, I don't know, Spotify or wherever, they'll be on a salary a year, a decent salary. I don't know what that would be, but that comes with a lot of benefits, you know, like healthcare and all this stuff. Artists have no like, if they're not like promoting or creating or whatever else, there's no infrastructure to support their well-being, and there's definitely nothing that's paid for in that regard. No consistency, and everything is pretty much on an artist's shoulders. And also the other deep thing is that a lot of artists are using a side of their brain that isn't necessarily a structured, business-minded, you know, like ruthless, like way, you know, so they're easily exploited because they ultimately just want to make art. I'm not a business-minded person. I've had to fucking learn on my feet or get people around me who I trust.
Yeah.
Because ultimately people want to make money, and the people at the top of the music game make a ridiculous amount of fucking money, like a stupid amount of money. Yeah. And like it just doesn't bear. And then now in this generation of self-marketing, it's like you've got this kind of content farm thing going on where people are just there, just making content. Like the fact that content is such an accepted word, you know? And it was interesting. I saw a tweet recently where someone was going, everything's content. This is a guy who works in the industry. He's trying to do a positive spin on the independence of artists. And they were like, he was like, the stigma around content is ridiculous. Everything's content. You made a new song, it's content. You got a tweet, it's content. And I'm like, yo, listen, I hear your point, but people know the difference between content and art. Like they just do, you know? Like content is cool. Like it's great to have an audience and interact with that audience. Yeah. That's great. But some people are good at making things and they want to present those things. If they have to like, you know, show you what they're doing, what they're eating for breakfast, and they don't want to, that's when it becomes content.
But I also think, I completely agree. And I think the biggest problem with that as well is it convinces people that any moment they're not working or like churning out this idea of content, because everything can be work and because everything can be monetized or can be content, it's making you feel like every moment where you're just existing rather than putting something out, you're essentially foregoing success.
Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Do you know how wild that sentence is that you just said?
Yeah.
Every moment you're existing.
Yeah, and like we are not made to need to output at every moment of the day. Like I got onto TikTok, for example, for the first time in March. Like before that point, I had downloaded it for one weekend, literally hadn't even had anything else. I think it's amazing. And I think in certain ways, the defiltering it's like had on the industry, I think is amazing. But like the amount of things, because it's so unfiltered and because it's so easy to put out content that could be anything. You can constantly
think why I haven't done that.
It's like, why am I brushing my teeth without fucking doing it? And it's like, because everything can be monetized and because everything can be content, anything that's not is automatically you being lazy or deciding not to make money or any of these things. And I think when that's applied to a label as well and then taken down to their artists, essentially what that means is you could always be producing more.
But what's fucking mad is there used to be people at labels who'll be employed to help you market your shit.
But now it's up to you.
And now they can just look at someone who's popping and go, yeah, we'll give you some money and we'll put up a billboard.
Which is really, really tough because it puts the whole machine on the artist, and actually the artist is there to do the art.
It's wild. Listen, like labels have a place because they've got loads of money and they can definitely push things, you know what I mean? And like, that's why people will still do deals. And especially if you want to move internationally, there's contacts, you know, that's the way.
Yeah.
Everything's like, everything works in the same way. It's all like drug dealing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just all people, they gain power over particular spaces. They make sure other people can't access those spaces unless they have them. They have leverage. You know what I'm saying? So, but there is also, I suppose, the upside of social media is you can, if you have a business mindset, have people around you, you can maintain independence and become successful. But for me personally, seeing the extent of what you have to give nowadays to be a musician, I think it's pretty fucking wild.
If you did it again, would you go through the same route of going via a label with, say, if social media was like it is now? Or I
can't answer that. I don't know. I don't know. It happened how it happened.
Yeah.
No,
100%.
And at that time, a record deal was a dream.
100%. And also it would have been, like, you can't rewrite anything. Like, there's a reason you are where you are now. Like, that's amazing. And I guess the question is in like the differences of the industries. Like it's just mad different.
I just think I would have to speak to someone who has grown up in. I mean, there's like 15-year-olds who have never lived in a world without an iPhone. I want to speak to them. I want to know what it seems like the speed and the saturation of that industry of music or whatever else is wild. But you can have your own little pocket. You have your own little universe and empire. And I think now, if I came out now with access to the tools, I think I'd be all over TikTok. I think I was a little grafter. Same thing. I was working at it, man. If I had something to promote, I'd probably make fucking 10 TikToks a day. Yeah. Because I was just in a different mindset back then.
Of course.
I'm kind of imprisoned by the reality that I've seen everything happen.
Yeah. No, 100%. And you've spoken openly, and you spoke just then about your ADHD diagnosis and how at one point it actually, you know, you said that it hadn't kind of properly been diagnosed, or you didn't necessarily like know about it. What made you go and get that diagnosis, and why do you think you, I guess, hadn't been?
I got diagnosed with ADHD because I took some of my friends' ADHD medication in New York. It's called Adderall. Everyone fucking loves this shit, even if they haven't got ADHD. People say Adderall because it's like some super focused drug. But I was early 20s at this point. I honestly did not realize that people could think before they spoke. I thought if people weren't speaking, they weren't thinking anything. And I took this medication, and suddenly I was given this option to decide whether or not I wanted to say something. And I turned to a friend and was like, all my life I asked a friend, can you think about what you're saying before you say it? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, fuck, I think I need to just go speak to someone. Because I was that impulsive. Yeah. And then since then, I've tried to gain an understanding of it. And certain things that I've managed to grow out of with being more kind to my body, like nutrition and exercise, and, regulating caffeine and stuff like that. I would say to people who have ADHD with medication, like, I think maybe the goal is to be off it. But it is important, I think, for people with ADHD to see that there is a different way of being. There's a guy called Andrew Huberman who's a really impressive. Did you watch him? So he does an episode of ADHD on ADHD, and he said something really interesting, which was like the optimum way of using medication supposedly would be to do things that you would struggle with whilst you're on the medication, just to see how it's done, and then you can maybe have that neural pathway. Which I think is like a really logical way of doing it.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, I know.
It's like, oh, this is how it's meant to be
so
done.
like
Now I
take
can
the
replicate
medication,
this.
tidy somewhere, and just remind yourself of that part of your brain can function. But again, I think there are so many contributing factors to ADHD, and it's difficult to differentiate between anxiety and ADHD. And we live in a world where everybody abuses their bodies constantly because we're encouraged to. I have this conversation on a daily basis. Like our world's relationship with food is fucking dreadful and makes me really sad. And it's one of these things where like I battle with my own things like body dysmorphia and shit like that. But sometimes I wonder if I would even have these battles if I wasn't constantly fucking force-fed shit, you know? And how people's minds supposed to function properly when they're eating shit and they're not exercising. And also we have language that encourages unhealthy behaviors. It's encouraged for us to go out and get fucked up. It's encouraged for somebody to eat shit. Like say for example this is just a little example, and there might be other reasons, but I just noticed this, right? Again, just as a disclaimer, I'm not a practitioner. This is stuff I've picked up on. No. So like fasting is really popular at the moment, right? Especially in men. I think it might be slightly differently chemically with women. Aside of what anyone wants to do with fasting, there's genuine scientific evidence to back up the idea that if you allow your body to repair itself for like 18 hours plus, like just on fluids or water even, your body enters a state of repair. That's just the truth, right? You don't have to all the time, whatever else. Some people do intermittent fasting, and I believe actually in intuitive eating. I kind of think you should, but you should have it in your artillery to be able to not. But I think the person who discovered the benefits of fasting won like a fucking Nobel Prize or some shit, right? But now, if you encourage someone to eat less, it's rude. But if you encourage someone to eat more, it's loving, which is from an age where we were living off of rations. I wasn't, but where food was scarce, especially if you're working class. But now it's fucking on its head, isn't it? All the shit food is cheap, and people are gorging. You know? Yeah,
I mean it's an education issue, and it's a huge class issue, because if you're essentially in a society that I guess is by the way it values things, it's kind of subsidizing that shit food.
Yes, and rich people can afford healthy food. Yeah,
exactly. And so it becomes something that, as you say, has flipped on its head in terms of the it previously being rich people who could eat a lot more food, and it's flipped the other way, and that has so many more issues, because it's like also access to healthcare and better healthcare is going to be by people who have more access to money.
It's wild.
And so making the nutrition also and all of these other things far worse to people, the living standards, for example, like the council provisions, like a lot of all of these things that are available, it's this hugely like self-perpetuating cycle, like exacerbating all of these issues between classes, between like income levels and all of these things. It's insane. And I completely agree that all of it, in terms of those things like food, like it very much comes down to these things as well, that we consider maybe not as big. We consider it just like, oh yeah.
Well, I think, it's fuel for your body. Like, if people are struggling with their mind, that's one of the first places you go to, and exercise. I mean, you'll know that. Yeah. It's imperative, like, to keep the body working, but it's hard when they've got like incredible fucking TV shows dropping every single fucking day, when you can deliver groceries to your fucking door. It's hard to get into that mindset. And one thing that breaks my heart a little bit, again, I'd love you to speak on this because of your own journey with the gym, but I know what it feels like to be in a slump normally around Christmas or around winter. I don't actually really celebrate. I mean, my girlfriend celebrates Christmas. They have a great Christmas, and I come along. But so it's winter, it's cold, you eat a lot, and there's a slump, and you get stuck in this mentality of like, oh, I could just do fuck all because you're eating shit. That's kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
and you get out of it 3 months into working out, running, you get it. You want to eat things that keep your body going. You want to eat things that keep your mind going. That's actually one of the only TikToks I've ever done, was encouraging people to do this, because it's like you have to give your body those messages and it gets back to you.
Yeah.
But I see people and it's like they're just slumped. And the idea of there being a space where they want to move is so far. And I just like, one part of me is just like, I wish they would know that feeling.
Yeah.
But it is so hard. I don't think it's easy. I really don't. I really don't think it's easy.
And I think it's harder than ever in like a world where you're essentially like multi-billion-dollar companies are vying for your
Mate,
kind of
you've got
attention
beer companies
every day.
sponsoring football, bruv. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah. And also just the fact that like your attention, like in terms of social media, it's like they are paying for your attention. Like your eyes on this thing. If we look at our screen time now, it is actually insane.
I don't want to talk about it. What's yours?
I don't want to talk about it.
Is it double figures? Be honest.
No, it's not double figures. Cool. I'm in
Listen,
the office every day.
Could be.
I know it could be. But it's not double figures. But I know people who it is, and you genuinely think about it and you're like,
yeah,
that's what it's insane. And how do you consistently keep yourself healthy and not just healthy in terms of like body and everything, but healthy in terms of your mind, how you're thinking about your work, how you're thinking about your life, like all of these things that you've had a big journey in terms of going through?
I don't know, because again, the funny thing with me and health is I unfortunately picked up a kind of mild body dysmorphia. Say mild, it goes up and down depending on what's going on in my life. But that was really unfortunate. That was just because of, it's like more of a control. Well, it's a control issue. So even though I like to be in good shape, I'm hard on myself. And I think actually a lot of guys and girls perhaps suffer from that when you actually are in shape. So you have to find that happy middle. You can't, anything taken to an extreme is unhealthy, you know? So there is also a world where being healthy becomes unhealthy. If you're,
100%.
You know what I mean? So it's about finding that balance. But I mean, obviously when I was talking before about food and exercise, it's more on a general level.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I'd say the most straightforward things I've had to do in order to maintain my mental health is actually stopping things. I stopped drinking coffee, which is pretty wild. I've now reintroduced caffeine a little bit, but I stopped drinking coffee for about 3 months, 4 months, and was on decafs. And like I say, I love matcha. And then also sometimes when I work out now after having this thing, I'll have a little bit of like a caffeine drink. But the coffee culture was too much for me. I wouldn't know how to limit myself. I'd end up drinking coffee too late.
Yeah.
I'd get really anxious in the evenings. So I fucked off coffee. I stopped smoking somehow, which is fucking weird. I don't even know why that happened. That was actually when I was fasting. I just stopped smoking. It was so weird. But I think that's had a good impression on my mental health. I do dip, but I'm able to rebalance myself a lot faster without going to, because basically you go to vices, right? Or I go to vices when I get knocked. So before I'd have loads of vices, drink, whatever, drugs, sex, And then it's just like, as I've got older, I've just kind of like limited the vices. And sometimes the worst that's happened to me recently is I just ate cake for a day. that was like me having a breakdown recently. But that, I think I gave myself that compassion. I was like on balance. It could have been worse.
Yeah, I also think that sometimes you need to, I think it's really important to know yourself and know these things that are your downfalls or your vices or like any of these things. But actually also say, like when you said that you just had a day where you just like fucking ate cake.
Yeah, mate.
I also think that it's really important to be able to put yourself in a place where it's like, I'm not always going to control the things I can control, and I'm just going to like let myself.
You have to go easy on yourself.
Yeah, because otherwise you're constantly getting yourself into like this cycle of failure. It's like you always like there are always going to be things that like either distract you or you didn't do as well as you wanted to in all of this. And like if we're so harsh on ourselves that that always sets us back, then that's going to turn you to other vices.
Yeah, and I am hard on myself.
In terms of kind of like relationships and having got into fame so young, I can imagine that kind of self-destructive cycle that you talked about would have had like a really negative effect on things like your relationships, whether like friendships, romantic relationships, whatever, when you're kind of first really getting to know yourself. Did you find that that was kind of particularly hard to deal with when you were kind of, I guess, shooting up into fame?
My intimate relationships?
Either like friendships.
Yeah, so it puts under mad stress. Yeah, I was awful. I was a shit boyfriend. And I personally, struggle to even understand how to mediate friendships, how to nurture them. Something I've had to learn through pain and growing up and loss and heartbreak.
Yeah, and I can imagine as well in an industry that's probably quite lonely at times as well. It's also
I was
easy
fortunate to have Harley.
Yeah,
but even that would, the pressure would fracture us in ways. Yeah.
And I want you to talk about your children's book.
Yes,
that
please.
That you've written. What's it? What kind of spurred this?
So that's actually quite a good segue, because the kids' book that I've written is about me battling with my own obsession with completion. Obviously, I've written this story and it's in the context of a kids' book, and it's for kids. I've written it in a way where there's repetition and it's been beautifully illustrated by a wonderful woman called Beth Susanna. Colors are fucking phenomenal, and that I want kids to be engaged, and it's a journey and it's an adventure. But ultimately, the story itself is I want to write kids' books so when the adult's reading it to the kid, it's for them too.
I love that.
And it's about a little girl who loves finishing jigsaw puzzles. It's not really that important that it's a girl, to be honest, but yeah, and then she's obsessed with the feeling she gets when her jigsaw puzzle's completed. So the second one's done, she finds another puzzle, and she just does all these puzzles. And she says to her gran, of all the puzzles in the world, no, if I finish all the puzzles in the world, will I be sad forever? And her gran says, do you think puzzles is what makes you happy? And she says, yes. And her gran says, all right then, I'm gonna give you a puzzle. And she gives her an 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. And she's buzzing. So she starts putting this jigsaw together, and there's one piece missing. And she's like, no way, I've got to find this missing piece. And so she goes looking for it. But, you'll have to read the rest of the book to find out. But it's about where our priorities lie as human beings.
Yeah.
And actually about being okay with the idea of something not being finished.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you've decided through that to kind of go straight to the root and go to kind of in terms of going to children, but also, as you say, it's got a bigger meaning for, for the person reading the book to the kid.
Massively. And it was just because of a fucking thought process I had bordering on revelation in my mid-20s. Where I'm like, why I'm always looking for something. Which is okay, a bit. But all of us as a society are just constantly obsessed with something. We want something, but actually nothing. To want nothing.
Yeah.
Might be the greatest freedom we could have.
100%.
To just be, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and to kind of be happy.
And some people have some people need things, right? Maybe there's a differentiation between need and want. But it's I remember just being in a field, man, just looking out and being like, maybe I can be okay with just being in this field. I'm just maybe this is pretty great. I'm just,
Yeah. And just being, I guess, learning to be okay with where you are, even if you have things to get to. Even if you have big goals and even if you want to get to X, Y, and Z and tick off all of these things, we have such a societal look at things as the achievement is in the end goal. Yeah. And it's well, if there's never an end goal, because our signpost keeps moving as to what the end goal is, then we're never going to get to that. If happiness comes at the end goal and the end goal keeps moving, we're fucked.
Literally.
That's the whole problem.
You have to look at it as a game almost. But yeah, it's everybody needs a purpose. Everybody needs goals. But I don't think that it's that good of an idea to make the goal your identity. The achievement of that goal. Actually, the process of achieving that goal should be what we focus on.
100%.
What do you think? How do you feel with that? Are you one of these people who wins and then just moves on?
So I have such a problem with the idea of success and defining success for myself, because I've always been a person who wants to tick things off. Like I want to do this and I want to do this, and I'm like very ambitious, and I'll always set myself like the next level, like what I want to get to. But the problem with that is exactly what we were saying. Like when I get somewhere, of course, the next place I want to be is further down the line.
Yeah.
And then if my happiness or sense of achievement is coming from getting somewhere, then by definition, I can never reach that happiness that I'll get from this idea of success.
Yeah.
So for me, I've had such a journey within the past few years, and I'm nowhere near completing it, but I've had like such a journey in terms of actually allowing myself and continuously saying to myself as well, because I know I'm not naturally a person who quote unquote enjoys the journey. I'm naturally a person who enjoys the like hustle. Like I want to get there, and that's important, and that's so good for like ambition. But actually, if you can't enjoy that journey, you are never going to be happy, because that end goal's always going to move. And I know that that's like one of my biggest downfalls. So for me, it's just been constantly checking myself and constantly being like, you're happy now because you have that feeling of like excitement that you're about to get there. Actually just sit in that happiness, like sit in that and enjoy that, because we can always be striving for the next thing, and it's really good to be striving for the next thing. But if that's what you base your happiness on, you're always going to be like selling yourself short.
It's true.
And what a point to end on. Thank you so much. That was brilliant.